All right, so in the previous video, we focused on JavaScript arrays. In this video, I want to focus on looping, sequence, and selection structures. And so I want to primarily focus on the second bullet point here, more specifically these two sub bullet points here under flow control. Let's jump to those slides here. Here's a quick video that really focuses on the three basic control structures: sequence, selection, and looping. What I like to tell people is that most of the languages in the world are pretty much the same. You will find these three structures within those languages. What changes between the various languages is the syntax and the rules of the language. And then some languages have certain special features that makes our lives easier as developers. Some people like to call that syntactical sugar. But when you really break down a program, any particular program, whether it's a web application or a desktop application or IoT device application, you will find these three basic structures: sequence, selection, and looping. So what I'd like for you to do is pause this video and watch the video that you see on the screen here, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So hopefully that video gave you a better understanding of the three structures. Some of the things that you may find under each structure is this idea for sequence here. You'll find that it's really like declaring and initializing variables. It may be doing some calculation, input, output. So you ask the end user to input something, or you may output something to the console or to the window, and ask the user to give them some directions. Selection is where you come to a juncture in your program and you have to make a decision, right? Do I want to go right or do I want to go left? And so you can do, you could take action on one of the decisions, or you could take action on both decisions. And that's called what we call a single alternative and dual alternative. And then looping is when you want to process something, right? And we did an example of that with our code here, where we wanted to basically iterate through all the items in the list. And we use the looping structure. This is a for each. And we're going to talk about some other structures, such as the while loop, the do while loop, the for loop. And a lot of other languages have different ways of doing it here. But in JavaScript, some of the primary ways is using the for each, the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. So let's take a look at some of the syntax when it comes to the selection structure here. So if you look at the selection structure, here's an example, right? In the selection structures, you're gonna one or two alternatives, right? Either go right or go left. In this case here, we have two numbers declared. Number 1 is 2, number 2 is 5. And they're both integers. Now this is, I pulled this from a JavaScript, so this would be var. So let's change that here, right? And what this is saying, here's our condition. So if number 1 is greater or equal to number 2, output this. Else, output this. This is what we call a dual alternative. It gives us two different, it's going to take two different actions based on if this condition is true or not. In this case here, number 1 is not greater than number 2, right? Because number 1 is 2, and obviously the variable number num2 is equal to 5. It's holding value 5, and so because this condition does not evaluate to true, we're going to output what's in the else branch. So if we were to copy this here, and let's just go to JS bin, and what I'm going to do here is, let's see here, let's place this into my console here. Oops. Let's press clear, and let's refresh. All right, so let's go here and paste this here, right? And then if we hit run with JavaScript, we should get 2 is not greater than 5, right? And that's what we get because we made a decision. This condition evaluate to false. So if it was true, it would output the items here. If it's false, if this is not true, it's going to skip the block and then output the item or the statement on line 6. So it's a very simple example, but I think the one thing I want you to pay attention to is the syntax, right? We have if, we have our condition, and then this would be what we call a dual alternative because we have two possible outcomes based on this condition or expression. Here's an example of a single alternative. It's basically without the else clause, right? Now, there's some other ways we can structure out a decision within JavaScript. There's something called a switch statement. And so if I'm just going to do a quick Google, so JavaScript, switch statement, And we just take a look at what a switch statement would look like here. This is when you have to make multiple decisions. And so they'll give you various cases, and let's actually look at an example here. So this is one that's basically that associates based on the day count. It'll give you a day within a week. And so, and this is where we can make multiple decisions. So if we run this here, and so here it's going to output the value on that I have highlighted here, that whatever value was inputted, whatever day that we input, it'll give us that value. It'll put it in within the inner HTML. It'll say today is, and it'll give us the day. So if we gave it 0, right? So if we declared, let's say we say 4 here, right? And we just say day, right? And so because it's 4, day has 4 here, it should give us Thursday, right? And so it's just basically a different way of making multiple decisions, and we can use what we call a switch statement to do that. But just look at the syntax. You have this. I would say just make sure you pay attention to the syntax here. You can pass in any value here that you want, and not necessarily. You can have multiple statements within these cases, right? So this is just one statement that says day equals Sunday, day equals Monday, but you could have a statement that calculates, you know, the day value and then output it, or I guess what I'm trying to say here is that you can have multiple statements that you can put for a case, not just one statement here, right? This break is basically saying if it's go to the next statement. So if it's not true, right, go to the next case and break once this case is actually ran, go to the next case. All right. So anyway, there's multiple ways of making decisions. You can use if statements, you can use switch statements. There is a third way called ternary. That's a little bit more advanced, but it's just a shorter syntax for making a decision. Let me go ahead and pause there, and I'm going to let's go ahead and walk through an example before we get into looping structures, and to show you kind of a real example of how we can a use case where we can actually use within our code to make a decision, and then output that information to the interface. All right, so I'm going to bring up an example that we've been working with throughout these videos. Here is this example here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have the end user enter in the name and then the number of credits they're going to take based on the number of credits. So if they say above 12, we'll say that they're full-time. If they're below 12, we're going to say that they're a part-time student. And so we're going to have to make a decision, right? If the number of credits is greater than 12, assign full-time. If the numbers are below 12, give them part-time. So let's implement that code. And what I'm going to do is also use an array in this video, so we can bring in some of our prior knowledge from a previous video, so we can see how this all works together. So let's bring up our editor, and I want to use the same code that we've used in the previous video. So here we have a student object, and we have some particular attributes, and we have 2 methods. I'm going to write my code as part of this method here for the student. It's called getStudentStatus. All right. So within this function, this is where I'm going to write my logic here. So I am going to get the number of credits, and so one of the things I need to run this program is the number of credits, and so and that's going to be input here, and it's going to be assigned to the student object. So where am I going to get those credits from? So here I already have a statement. When somebody hits the submit button on the form, right, they click on that button, it's going to run this we call anonymous function. We're going to get the name of the student, and then we're going to target the element by its age. In this case here, I'll just say credits, right? And the max here would be they can't take no more than 24 credits. So I'll get the credits, and so if I go down here, stay with me, I'll change this get element by ID. And here, this statement is basically just targeting the element that I want to get the value from, right? And so we'll get the credits, and then what we're going to do is we're going to run And what this does here is it sets the value of whatever they input into that text box. It's going to set the value for credits for that student object, right? Because right now it's just a kind of a default number 55 placed there, and we have a default name, but these two here, these two statements will set the value for my unique student instance. And then we're going to call another function here. And this function or this method is called getStudentStatus, and this is where we're going to have to define the logic. We're going to declare an array. We're going to say var, and I'll just call status array. And there's going to be two possible options, and this is an array literal, and we're going to say part-time, and then here we'll just do full-time. I'm not sure if I need to put a hyphen here or not, right? So in this array I only have two items, part-time, and then I have full-time. And then what I'm going to do is make a decision, right? So here's my first decision. I'll say if, right, credits, right, this dot credits is greater than 12, and we'll just use 12 as the value if that's going to determine whether or not they're full-time or part-time. If this credits is greater than 12, what do we want to do, right? We want to basically say student status this, and I'm going to assign this student status to either full-time or part-time, right? So I'll say this student status is going to be equal to status array. So if it's greater or equal to 12, let's do that, include 12 there as well. We'll say give this student status, whoever student they enter, give them full-time, right? So we'll say, and remember the index here for full-time would be 1, because array started at position 0. So we'll say 1 here. Else, right? This is my dual alternative. We'll say this dot student status is equal to status array, and we'll give them part-time, because if this is not true, that means if the credits is not greater than or equal to 12, that means they're below 12. So we'll give them part-time status. And at this point here, we made our decision, and then we want to basically output that in our array. And so student status, and I've already put the text here that says these are the number of credits, and then the student status is going to be this here, and we're already recalling that function, both of these functions down here within whenever the end user submits the form by clicking on that submit button. So this should do the job here. So let's save it. Let's make sure we don't have any errors when we run our program. Right click and open this in a new browser, and I'll just go ahead and click on show student. We're going to put in, let's just put in Ben, right? And then here, number of credits, let's go ahead and do let's do 13, right? This should give us full-time. If we hit submit, right, status is full-time, right? So if we go here and let's go ahead and put in 9, this should give us part-time, right? So a really simple example of making a decision in our code, and also bringing in some of the previous knowledge of using an array, right? We could have multiple statuses here, right? We could say not only just part-time or full-time, right? We could put also non-credit seeking, right? We could say non-credit seeking, and that would be like a third status, right? But in this case, for our example, we only needed 2. Hopefully this example, you got a better understanding of how to use an array, and also how to use decision-making logic. In this case, we're using a dual alternative. I would encourage you to continue to practice and make some more alterations to this code here. And I'll put up the repository for this code. I'll attach it to the video, a link to the video. So if you do want to download this code and alter it, you can do that. But hopefully that gives you a good example of how to work with an array and also make a decision within our code. Now in our next video, we're going to talk about looping structures and how to output information. And we're going to do an example of that and then output some information back to the screen. And we're going to yeah, we'll go from there. Stay tuned.